It started as protocol. 7,000 alligators were released into Florida wetlands that held not a single drop of water. Officials signed off, checklists were skipped, and ancient instincts clashed with bureaucratic overconfidence. Within days, the headlines exploded. Viral videos flooded social feeds, neighborhoods panicked, and desperate migrations began. But how did standard wildlife policy turn into a fight for survival on cracked mud? The paper trail reveals just how fragile oversight can be when nature is an afterthought. Every alligator relocation in Florida begins with a checklist, one that is as much about protecting the animals as it is about the people living nearby. The Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, FWC, requires a detailed assessment before any release. The first step is to confirm the site has standing water. This is not just a glance at a map or a guess based on last month's rainfall. Inspectors are supposed to walk the ground, measure water depth, and document their findings on official forms. If the water is too low, the release is delayed or moved. The guidelines are clear. No alligators should go into a habitat unless there is enough water to support them. The next step involves checking for food sources. Wetlands must have enough fish, turtles, and birds to sustain a new group of predators. Inspectors also look for cover, places where alligators can hide from heat or threats. All findings are recorded, signed, and submitted to FWC supervisors. Only then does the relocation get a green light. Oversight does not end there. FWC holds the authority to halt a release at any stage if conditions change. If a drought hits or if water levels drop suddenly, the plan is paused. There is even a standing water test, a simple but strict rule that says if there is not enough water to submerge an adult alligator, the site is off limits. These protocols are designed to prevent disaster, and every official involved is expected to sign off on the paperwork. On paper, the process leaves little room for error. Each box checked, each signature collected, and each habitat inspected is meant to guarantee that relocated alligators have a fighting chance. The checklist is more than a formality. It is a safeguard, one that is supposed to stand between a routine wildlife transfer and a crisis. Florida's wetlands do not stay wet year-round. Each year, the dry season arrives between November and April, shrinking ponds and exposing cracked earth where water once flowed. Rainfall drops, rivers slow, and vast stretches of marsh turn to dust until the summer storms return. This cycle shapes everything about life in the Everglades, from the movement of birds to the survival of alligators. In some years, the dryness is so severe that entire basins sit empty for months, waiting for the rains to refill them. Efforts to restore these wetlands have become a race against time and drought. Projects like the 6,500-acre stormwater treatment area, completed by the South Florida Water Management District in 2023, are designed to hold water longer and keep habitats from drying out. Engineers build levees and canals, trying to mimic the natural flow that once spread water slowly across the landscape. These artificial lifelines have become restoration essential, especially as development and climate change push the system to its limits. Yet even with restoration in progress, the timing of water return does not always match the needs of wildlife. Some areas remain bone dry well into the spring, long after alligators have started searching for new territory. The difference between a thriving wetland and a barren field can come down to a few inches of water in a few weeks on the calendar. For biologists, these seasonal swings are a constant concern. A dry basin is not just inconvenient, it is inhospitable. Without water, there is no food, no shelter, and no way for alligators to survive a relocation. The push to restore Florida's wetlands is ongoing, but the land itself does not keep to human schedules. Restoration benchmarks and construction targets cannot force rain to fall or water to linger. The reality is simple. Releasing alligators into a landscape stripped of its lifeblood is not just a paperwork error. It is an ecological gamble with lives at stake. Public records in Florida are supposed to reveal the full story behind every wildlife relocation. The process starts with a request under the state open records law, searching for approval forms, site assessments, and supervisory sign-offs. But when environmental advocates and journalists filed for documentation on the mass alligator release, what came back was little more than silence. Agency archives turned up a handful of generic memos, no signed site assessments, no habitat readiness reports, and not a single document confirming who authorized the transfer. The expected paper trail simply was not there. Requests for the official checklist yielded only blank templates, never the completed forms required by protocol. The digital logs, meant to timestamp every step, showed gaps where entries should have appeared. Even the chain of command emails, usually a steady stream of approvals and updates, contained unexplained holes. One entry marked as final review was dated 2 weeks after the release had already taken place, raising more questions than answers about when or if the proper steps were followed. Attempts to trace the decision up the ladder led nowhere. No record identified the supervisor responsible for the green light. No internal assessment explained how a release could proceed without water on site. The absence of documents left a void where accountability should have been. For those searching for answers, the lack of records became its own kind of evidence. A sign that the safeguards meant to prevent disaster had failed before the first alligator ever left its holding pen. Instead of clarity, the record hunt revealed a system where critical steps could vanish into bureaucratic shadows. The missing paperwork, the mismatched dates, and the silent email chains pointed to a process that operated without transparency. In the world of wildlife management, where every decision can mean life or death for thousands of animals, the absence of evidence was more than an oversight. It was a warning. Eve Samples, director of Friends of the Everglades, didn't wait for disaster to unfold before raising her voice. As news of the planned alligator release circulated among environmental circles, she filed a formal legal objection with the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. Her petition cited violations of both the Endangered Species Act and the Clean Water Act, arguing that the release would devastate habitats already struggling under years of drought and mismanagement. Samples called out what she described as a government gone rogue, one that ignored the very laws designed to protect the Everglades' fragile ecosystem. She said that this mass detention center was ramrodded into the middle of our country's oldest national preserve, with no public input, no environmental analysis, and no regard for the billions of dollars invested in Everglades restoration. The legal complaint didn't just target the agencies overseeing the release. It named unnamed officials whose signatures, or lack thereof, had allowed the process to move forward without the required environmental review. Redacted documents revealed that key decision-makers had bypassed standard protocols, fast-tracking approval under political pressure. The suit demanded an immediate halt to the release and a full investigation into the missing assessments and absent oversight. Other watchdog groups joined the call, filing parallel complaints and amplifying the message on social media. While state officials insisted the project was above board, the mounting legal pressure forced them to respond in court filings and press releases. The tension between public interest groups and government agencies spilled into the headlines, with environmentalists warning of irreversible harm and bureaucrats defending their decisions with vague assurances and incomplete data. For a brief moment, the fate of thousands of alligators and the wetlands themselves hung in the balance as the courts weighed the evidence and the public watched, waiting for answers. Day 1 began with silence. The sun baked the exposed mud flats where water was supposed to stretch for miles. Instead, the ground cracked open, each fissure tracing the absence of rain. The alligators, released in their thousands, scattered across the dry basin, their bodies coated in dust, searching instinctively for water that did not exist. By midday, locals driving past the site stopped, stunned by the sight of hundreds of reptiles clustered in shallow depressions, some barely moving. Phones came out. Videos spread online within hours, capturing alligators crawling over each other, jaws open, desperate for shade or a trickle of moisture. By the end of the first day, wildlife forums and local news feeds were flooded with images. Long lines of alligators crossing cracked earth, their scales dull, their movements sluggish. The hashtag Gator Crisis started trending in Florida. On day 2, the story jumped to national headlines. Helicopter footage showed the full scale, 7,000 animals packed into a wasteland with no sign of relief. Officials issued a brief statement insisting the release was in accordance with established protocols, but the footage told another story. Day 3 brought the first viral pool video. In a gated community 5 miles from the release site, a homeowner filmed an alligator wedged in the corner of his backyard pool, eyes barely above the waterline. Animal control arrived, but by then, the clip had already racked up hundreds of thousands of views. More videos followed, with alligators in golf course ponds, on suburban lawns, even blocking traffic on a 2-lane road. The public's shock turned to outrage. Comment sections filled with accusations and pleas for intervention. Reporters camped outside the FWC regional office, demanding answers. The sense of crisis escalated with each new clip, each new sighting, as the gap between official assurances and the reality on the ground grew impossible to ignore. 7 days after the release, a cell phone clip from the edge of the Palm Ridge golf course drew national attention. In the video, a dozen alligators sprawled across the manicured grass, their bodies motionless in the midday heat. A sprinkler arced over the green, missing the animals entirely. By then, reports of alligators in backyards, parking lots, and shallow ornamental ponds had multiplied across the county. The official response lagged behind the reality on the ground. Dr. Elena Ruiz, a field biologist with 2 decades of wetland experience, had warned her supervisors that the basin was weeks from holding water. Her emails, sent in the days before the transfer, outlined the risks. No standing water, no prey, and no shade. "This is not a habitat," she wrote. "It's a death sentence." When her concerns went unanswered, she began documenting the aftermath on her own, logging GPS coordinates for stranded animals and recording the temperature of the exposed mud, often topping 110 degrees by noon. She later described the scene as a slow-motion disaster, visible from any roadside. The rescue effort started not with state officials, but with neighbors like Marcus Bell, who lived 3 blocks from the golf course. Marcus and his teenage son filled plastic kiddie pools in their backyard, hauling water from the kitchen sink. They called animal control, but the wait list stretched for days. By the end of the week, volunteers had organized a relay system, using tarps and wheelbarrows to move smaller alligators to shaded retention ponds on private land. Local veterinarians donated electrolyte solutions and first aid supplies. Social media groups sprang up overnight, coordinating sightings and sharing advice on how to keep the animals cool. For every rescue, dozens more alligators remained stranded. The logistics were overwhelming. There were no official vehicles, no coordinated plan, just a patchwork of compassion and desperation. Dr. Ruiz, documenting each improvised rescue, described the effort as a community fighting to undo a bureaucratic mistake, one animal at a time. The gap between scientific warning and administrative action had become a chasm, measured in suffering and survival. Wildlife surveys conducted in the aftermath painted a stark picture. Of the 7,000 alligators released, fewer than 3,000 were confirmed alive after 2 weeks. Field biologists using drone footage and on-the-ground counts estimated a survival rate just above 40%. Necropsies performed on recovered carcasses told a consistent story. Most deaths traced directly to dehydration. The bodies showed classic signs: sunken eyes, shriveled skin, and empty stomachs. The lack of standing water left the animals with nowhere to cool their bodies or hunt for food. Scavengers moved in quickly, and the exposed remains attracted vultures and feral hogs, further disrupting the fragile ecosystem. In places where alligators once shaped the wetlands balance, their absence triggered a cascade. Small mammals and birds abandoned the site, and invasive plants began to spread unchecked. The numbers delivered a blunt verdict. The release had not only decimated the alligator population, it had thrown the entire wetland community into turmoil. Each data point, each survey became a measure of loss, recorded in spreadsheets and field notebooks as evidence of a disaster that could have been avoided. Internal reviews promised answers, but the findings landed with a thud. No one at the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission lost their job. Not a single supervisor faced disciplinary action. The official response pointed to procedural confusion and a lack of clear documentation, but stopped short of naming anyone responsible for the decision to release thousands of alligators into a dry basin. Instead, the agency offered $30 as a bonus to field staff who completed relocation checklists on time, a gesture that critics called an insult given the scale of the disaster. In the wake of public outrage, administrators circulated a draft for a new protocol, a mandatory hydration check before any wildlife transfer. The proposed rule required field teams to photograph standing water at each site and upload the evidence to a central database before approval. But as the months passed, the draft remained just that: a policy circulating in email threads and never adopted as official regulation. The system, built on forms and signatures, absorbed the shock and moved on. For the alligators and for the wetlands left behind, accountability came only in the form of paperwork and promises. Today, the real test is not what could happen, but how we separate fact from viral fiction. In an era where misinformation spreads faster than wildlife, the stakes for ecological truth have never been higher. Every unverified headline shapes public trust and policy. Responsible stewardship demands vigilance, not just in the field, but in the stories we choose to believe. Stay curious and question everything.